The red lights came on at exactly 3 in the morning, and the sirens followed 2 seconds later, screaming through every corridor of the Valorian research station on Axios 7, waking every scientist and every guard from their sleep, filling the air with panic and dread. Director Ulysses jumped from her sleeping pod and grabbed her communicator before her feet even touched the cold metal floor. And the voice on the other end told her the words she had feared hearing since the day the creature arrived at the station. Specimen Theta 9 has escaped containment, the security officer said, his voice shaking with fear. The reinforced barriers failed, and we do not know how, but the creature is loose somewhere in the facility. Ulysses felt her 4 hearts begin to race inside her chest, and her blue skin turned pale as the blood drained from her face, because she knew exactly what Specimen Theta 9 was capable of doing. The creature came from Korath Prime, a world so dangerous that the Galactic Council had classified it as a Category 1 death world, a place where every living thing evolved to kill or be killed. And Theta 9 was the apex predator of that nightmare planet. It weighed 400 kilograms of pure muscle and armored scales, with 6 eyes that could see in complete darkness and claws that could tear through reinforced steel. And its venom could dissolve flesh in seconds, eating through bone and metal alike. But the worst part was not its body or its poison. The worst part was its mind, because alpha beasts from Korath Prime could sense fear, and they could project terror into the minds of other creatures, filling their prey with panic so strong that most beings simply froze in place and waited to die. 7 researchers had died at other facilities that tried to study these creatures, and 3 of them had been Thanix warriors, beings twice the size of humans with skin-like armor, and even they had fallen to the alpha beast's psychic assault and venomous strikes. Now one of these monsters was loose on her station, and Ulysses had over 200 souls under her care. She ran to the command center, her long legs carrying her through the flashing red corridors as other Valorians pressed themselves against the walls in terror. And when she arrived, the security screen showed chaos everywhere. "Where is it now?" she demanded, her voice sharp with authority, even as her hands trembled. Lieutenant Corvith, the head of station security, pointed to a screen showing the eastern quadrant of the facility, and his gray face was grim. It broke through 3 containment doors and killed 2 security drones before we lost visual tracking, he said. The last sensor reading placed it somewhere in the exterior grounds near the botanical gardens, but we cannot get a clear lock on its position. "Seal every entrance to the main facility," Ulysses ordered. "Begin full evacuation protocols for all non-essential personnel, and authorize lethal force for your security teams." Corvith nodded and began issuing commands. And within minutes, the station transformed into a fortress, with blast doors slamming shut and scientists rushing to panic rooms and emergency shelters. The evacuation roster appeared on the main screen, showing green check marks next to each name as personnel reported to their designated safe zones. And Ulysses watched the list scroll by, counting heads and praying to the old gods that everyone would make it. Then she saw it, a name without a check mark, a name that stayed red no matter how many times the system pinged for a response. Marcus Cole. "Human groundskeeper. Who is this Marcus Cole?" she asked, pointing at the screen. One of the junior officers pulled up his file, and a picture appeared showing a human male in his middle years, with weathered skin and kind eyes and dirt under his fingernails, wearing the simple uniform of the station's maintenance staff. "He tends the botanical gardens and maintains the exterior facilities," the officer explained. "He has been here for almost 2 standard years, and his quarters are in the Eastern Residential Block." The Eastern Residential Block, the same direction the creature had been heading. "Send a security team to find him immediately," Ulysses said. But even as she spoke, She knew in her heart that they would be too late. Corvith dispatched a drone to the humans' quarters. And when the video feed came back, it showed an empty room with an unmade bed and a cup of cold liquid sitting on a small table. And on the floor near the door lay a communicator, abandoned and silent. His communicator is still there, Corvus said quietly. He must have left in a hurry, or he did not finish the sentence. But everyone in the room understood what he meant. The Alpha Beast had found its first victim. Ulysho closed her eyes for a moment and said a silent prayer for the human soul, because she had met Marcus Cole a few times in passing, and he had always seemed like a gentle creature, always smiling, always talking to the plants in his gardens as if they could hear him. He did not deserve to die alone in the dark, torn apart by a monster from a death world. Add his name to the presumed casualties list, she said, her voice heavy with grief, and find that creature before it kills anyone else. The security teams armed themselves with neural disruptors and plasma lances, weapons powerful enough to stop a charging Thanix, and they moved out into the station's exterior grounds with fear in their hearts and death in their hands. The hunt for Specimen Theta 9 had begun, and somewhere in the darkness, the Alpha Beast was waiting. But what none of them knew, what none of them could possibly imagine, was that Marcus Cole was not dead at all. He was sitting in his garden shed with a cup of coffee, reading a book on his datapad, while 400 kilograms of apex predator purred beside him like a kitten. And he had absolutely no idea that the entire station was looking for him. Lieutenant Corvith led his team through the airlock and into the cold night air of Axio 7, where 2 moons hung low in the purple sky and cast long shadows across the station's exterior grounds. There were 8 soldiers in his squad, all of them veterans who had faced pirates and raiders and hostile wildlife on a dozen different worlds. But none of them had ever hunted anything like an alpha beast. And Corvith could see the fear in their eyes even as they tried to hide it. Stay close and stay calm, he told them, keeping his voice steady even though his own hearts were pounding in his chest. The creature can sense fear, so the more afraid you are, the more dangerous it becomes. Control your emotions and we might survive this. The soldiers nodded and gripped their weapons tighter, and they moved out across the grounds in a standard search pattern, their boots crunching on the gravel paths that wound between the botanical gardens. Marcus Cole had built these gardens over the past 2 years, planting flowers and trees and shrubs from dozens of different worlds, creating a small oasis of green and color in the middle of the gray metal station. And Corvith had always thought it was a waste of resources. Now he wondered if the human had ever imagined that his pretty gardens would become a hunting ground. The bioscanner in Corvith's hand beeped softly, picking up traces of the creature's unique chemical signature. And the trail led deeper into the gardens, past rows of flowering bushes and under the branches of tall trees that the human had somehow convinced to grow in this alien soil. I have tracks here, one of the soldiers called out, pointing to the ground with her weapon. Deep claw marks. Very fresh. Corvith knelt beside the marks and felt his blood run cold, because the gouges in the soil were as long as his forearm and as deep as his hand, carved by claws that could tear through metal like paper. It came through here moving fast, he said, studying the pattern of the tracks. But look, the stride is uneven, almost stumbling. I think the alarm startled it. This was both good news and bad news, because a startled alpha beast was unpredictable, lashing out at anything that moved. But it also meant the creature was not hunting with purpose. Not yet. They followed the trail through the gardens, past shattered sensor posts and broken branches. And with each step, Corvith expected to find the human's body, torn apart and half-eaten, left behind like garbage. But there was no blood, no viscera, no signs of feeding anywhere along the path. This does not make sense, one of the soldiers muttered. Alpha beasts kill when they feel threatened, and they eat what they kill. Where is the body? Corvus shook his head, unable to answer, because the creature's behavior was completely outside anything he had studied in the briefing files. The trail led them to the northern edge of the gardens, where the ornamental plants gave way to the functional structures of the station's support systems. And there, sitting alone in the shadow of the hydroponics domes, was a small metal building with a single door and no windows. The groundskeeper's equipment shed Corvus held up his fist, signaling his team to stop, and they spread out in a semicircle around the building with their weapons raised. And ready, bioscanner is showing 2 heat signatures inside, he said quietly. One large, one small. The creature is in there, and something else is with it. The human? One soldier asked. Maybe, Corvus replied. Or maybe just what is left of him. He thought about what they might find inside that shed. A corpse. A hostage, or worst of all, a trap, and none of the options were good. Prepare for breach, he ordered. And his team moved into position around the door, their weapons humming with charged energy. On my signal, we go in fast and hard. Target the creature first and secure any survivors second. The soldiers nodded, their faces grim behind their helmets, and Corvus counted down in his head, steeling himself for the horror that waited inside 3, 2, 1. He slammed his palm against the door release, and the metal panels slid open with a hiss, and 8 soldiers poured into the shed with weapons blazing with targeting lights, and then they stopped. Every single one of them froze in place, their weapons hanging useless in their hands, their mouths open in shock, because what they saw inside that shed was impossible. The alpha beast was there, all 400 kilograms of it, filling half the small space with its massive armored body. And its 6 eyes were open and watching them, glowing faintly in the dim light, but it was not attacking, not snarling, not preparing to strike. It was lying on a pile of old thermal blankets in the corner of the shed, curled up like a sleeping animal, and its massive tail was wrapped around its body, and a sound was coming from its chest, deep rumbling vibration that Corvus had never heard before. It took him a moment to realize what the sound was. The creature was purring and leaning against its enormous flank, nestled in the curve of its body as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Sat Marcus Cole. The human was holding a datapad in one hand and a cup of cold coffee in the other, and he looked up at the armed soldiers with an expression of mild surprise, as if they had interrupted him during his lunch break. Oh, he said, his voice calm and quiet. You found us. The creature shifted at the sound of his voice, and every soldier tensed, fingers tightening on triggers. But the alpha beast only adjusted its position to curl more tightly around the human, draping one enormous forelimb across his lap like a protective blanket. Marcus Cole reached up with his free hand and scratched the creature under its jaw, right where the armor plates met the softer scales of its throat, and the purring grew louder. It is okay, girl, he murmured to the beast. They are friends. No need to be scared. Corvus stood in the doorway of the shed, his weapon hanging forgotten at his side, and he tried to find words for what he was seeing. Tried to make sense of a universe where a human could sit calmly with a monster that had killed 7 researchers across 2 facilities, but there were no words, no explanations, no logic that could contain this moment, so he did the only thing he could do. He lowered his weapon and said, I think you need to come with us. The news spread through the station like wildfire, jumping from communicator to communicator, from whispered conversation to shouted exclamation, until every single being on Axio 7 knew what had happened in the groundskeeper's shed. The alpha beast had been found, and it was not eating anyone, and it was curled up with the human like a pet. Nobody believed it at first. Director Eula Show had to see the security footage 3 times before she accepted that her eyes were not lying to her, and even then she kept shaking her head and muttering in her native language. Words that the translation software could not quite capture, but that sounded like prayers or curses, or maybe both. How is this possible? She asked Lieutenant Corvith, who stood beside her in the command center, looking just as confused as she felt. That creature has killed trained warriors and armed researchers. How is a groundskeeper still alive? I do not know, Corvith admitted. But he is alive, and the creature shows no signs of aggression toward him. In fact, it seems almost protective. They watched the footage again. Marcus Cole sitting in the corner of the shed, reading his datapad, while the most dangerous predator in the known galaxy purred against his side like an oversized cat. The human had named it. They learned he called it Rosie when Corvith had tried to escort Marcus out of the shed. The creature had growled and shifted its body to block the door. And for one terrible moment, everyone thought the killing was about to begin. But Marcus had simply put his hand on the beast's massive head and said, "None of that now, Rosie. Be good." And the creature had settled back down with a sound that could only be described as a grumble. A grumble. Like a child told to go to bed early, the soldiers had backed away slowly, keeping their weapons trained on the creature. And Marcus had walked out of the shed with the alpha beast padding along beside him like a loyal hound, its 6 eyes scanning the darkness for threats, its tail swishing back and forth in the cool night air. They had made it all the way to the containment wing before anyone thought to ask the obvious question, "Why is it following you?" Corvith had asked. Marcus had shrugged, a very human gesture. That translated poorly to Valurian body language. She was scared. He said simply, "The alarms and the lights, they frightened her. She just wanted somewhere quiet." Now Marcus sat in the medical bay while doctors scanned him for injuries and scientists bombarded him with questions. And outside the bay, visible through the reinforced window, the alpha beast sat in the temporary holding pen and watched him with all 6 of its unblinking eyes. It had refused to let anyone else near it, snarling and snapping at every researcher who approached, but it made no attempt to break out of the pen, content to simply sit and wait as long as it could see Marcus. "This is unprecedented," said Dr. Vethnal, the station's chief xenobiologist, as she reviewed the scan results on her datapad. "The creature's stress hormones are at the lowest levels we have ever recorded. Its neural activity suggests a state of calm contentment that we did not think alpha beasts were capable of experiencing. She is not in it," Marcus said quietly. "She is a she, and her name is Rosie." The doctor blinked her large silver eyes at him, clearly unsure how to respond to a human who gave names to monsters. "Very well," she said slowly. "Rosie's physiological readings indicate a profound bond with you. Something similar to the pack dynamics we have observed in social predators on other worlds. She has imprinted on you somehow." "I do not know about imprinting," Marcus said. "I just talked to her." "Talked to her?" Marcus nodded, and for the first time since the soldiers had found him, he seemed slightly embarrassed. "Her containment cell is next to the Eastern Gardens," he explained. "I work there every day, tending the plants, pulling weeds, that sort of thing. And I noticed that she was always watching me through the glass." He paused, remembering, and a small smile crossed his weathered face. Most people who walked by her cell would hurry past, trying not to look at her, because she scared them, and she knew it. But I did not have anywhere to hurry to, so I started sitting near the glass during my lunch breaks, just eating my sandwich and watching her back. That must have triggered her predatory instincts. The doctor said, "Direct eye contact is usually interpreted as a challenge by alpha beasts." "Maybe," Marcus agreed. "But she did not seem angry to me. She seemed curious, like she was trying to figure out why I was not running away like everyone else." He had started talking to her after a while, he explained. Just casual conversation about his day, about the plants he was growing, about the weather on his home planet. "I know she could not understand me," he said, but I think she liked the sound of my voice. Or maybe she just liked having someone around who was not afraid of her. Days turned to weeks, and weeks turned to months, and every day Marcus would sit by the glass and talk to Rosie. And every day she would press closer to the barrier, watching him with those 6 strange eyes. And sometimes she would make a sound deep in her chest, not a growl, not a snarl, but something softer, a greeting, maybe, or a thank you. When the containment breach happened and the alarms started screaming and the lights started flashing, Marcus had been asleep in his quarters, and he had stumbled outside without his communicator, still half awake, and found Rosie waiting for him in the garden. She was shaking, he said, her massive body trembling with fear, because the noise and the chaos had terrified her. And she had come looking for the only creature on the entire station that did not treat her like a monster. So I opened the shed door and let her in. Marcus finished, and then I made some coffee and read my book until you lot showed up. The doctor stared at him for a long moment, her silver eyes wide with something that might have been wonder or disbelief or both. "You were not afraid," she said. "Not even for a moment?" Marcus thought about it, really thought about it, and then he shook his head. "She needed help," he said. "How could I be afraid of something that needed help?" Outside the window, Rosie pressed her massive snout against the barrier and watched him with all 6 of her eyes. And in the depths of that alien gaze, something that looked almost like love shone through. 3 months after the night that changed everything, the Galactic Research Council held a special session to decide the fate of Specimen. 39 representatives from 12 different species gathered in the Grand Chamber on Station Prime, their holographic avatars flickering in seats that circled the central speaking platform. And the debate had been going on for hours without any sign of resolution. "The creature must be destroyed," argued Councillor Veth, a tall Thanix with scales like polished copper. "It has killed 7 of our people already. Keeping it alive serves no purpose except to risk more deaths." "Destruction is wasteful," countered Representative Mel, a small Cortith with fur the color of starlight. "The creature should be returned to its home world and released into the wild. Let it live out its days on Korath Prime where it belongs, and risk it breeding and producing more of its kind." Councillor Veth snapped. "The alpha beast population is already dangerous enough without adding a specimen that has learned to interact with civilized species." The debate went back and forth, growing more heated with each exchange, and in the observation gallery above the chamber floor, Marcus Cole sat with his voice, hands folded in his lap, and waited for his turn to speak. He had never addressed the Galactic Council before, had never even seen the inside of Station Prime until yesterday, and the enormity of the chamber made him feel very small and very human. But he had promised Rosie that he would try, and Marcus Cole always kept his promises. Finally, after what felt like hours, the council moderator called for new testimony, and Marcus stood up on legs that trembled only a little bit. "The council recognizes Marcus Cole of Earth," the moderator announced, "groundskeeper of Valorian Research Station Axio 7 and primary contact for Specimen Theta 9. Marcus made his way down to the central platform, feeling the eyes of a dozen alien species on his back. And when he reached the speaker's position, he had to clear his throat twice before he could make his voice work. "I am not a scientist," he began, "and I'm not a politician. I'm just a gardener who likes to grow things and take care of things and make things better, if I can." He looked around the chamber at all the unfamiliar faces, all the creatures who held Rosie's life in their hands. "You all keep calling her a specimen and a creature and a beast. But that is not what she is," he said. "She is a living being with thoughts and feelings and fears. And she has been alone and scared for most of her life because everyone who looks at her sees a monster." "She has killed 7 people," Councillor Veth interrupted. "Forgive me if I do not weep for her feelings. She killed because she was afraid, Marcus said firmly. She killed because everyone around her was terrified, and she could feel that terror pressing in on her from all sides. How would you react if you were surrounded by beings who hated you and feared you and wanted you dead? The counselor had no answer for that. I spent months talking to her through a glass wall. Marcus continued, just sitting with her, keeping her company, treating her like a friend instead of a threat. And in all that time, she never once tried to hurt me, never once showed any aggression, never once did anything except listen to my voice and press closer to the glass. He took a deep breath and played his final card. You want to study alpha beasts, to understand them, to learn how to coexist with creatures from death worlds. I can help you do that, but only if Rosie lives. And how exactly would you help? Representative Mill asked, her small ears twitching with curiosity. Let me work with her, Marcus said. Give her a proper habitat, not a cell, somewhere with space to move and things to explore and sunlight on her scales. And let me be there with her, talking to her, earning her trust, showing her that not every creature in the galaxy wants her dead. He looked directly at Counselor Veth, meeting those cold copper eyes without flinching. I can tell you more about alpha beast behavior in 10 minutes than your researchers have learned in 10 years. Because I actually asked her what she wanted instead of just poking her with instruments. Give me the chance to prove it. The chamber fell silent, and Marcus could feel his heart pounding in his chest as the council members exchanged glances and murmured consultations. Finally, the moderator called for a vote. And one by one, the representatives made their decisions. It was closer than Marcus wanted to think about, but when the final count was tallied, the verdict was clear. Specimen Theta 9 would live. The conditions were strict. A new habitat would be constructed on Axio 7, twice the size of her former containment cell, with natural elements from Karth Prime and environmental controls to simulate her home world. And Marcus Cole would be promoted from groundskeeper to something called a Xenofauna Behavioral Specialist, which was a fancy title that basically meant he would spend his days taking care of Rosie and teaching others how to do the same. When he got back to Axio 7 and told Rosie the news, she pressed her massive head against his chest and made that deep rumbling sound that he had come to recognize as contentment. And Marcus wrapped his arms around her as best he could and held her tight. We did it, girl, he whispered. You are going to be okay. Word of what happened spread across the galaxy in the weeks that followed, carried by news feeds and gossip networks and official channels alike. And before long, the requests started coming in. A research station in the Andromeda sector wanted help with a territorial pack of Vorn stalkers that had been killing their survey teams. A zoo on the colony world of New Geneva was struggling to care for a pair of Krillian nightmares that refused to eat. A wildlife preserve on the edge of known space needed someone to relocate a nest of Deathweaver spiders without getting anyone killed. They all asked for the same thing. Send us a human. It turned out that humans were not just good at befriending alpha beasts. They were good at befriending almost anything, driven by that strange evolutionary quirk that made them look at deadly monsters and think about belly rubs and treats and funny names. Within a year, the first human Xenofauna liaison office was established on Station Prime, staffed by a growing team of humans who had shown the same impossible gift as Marcus Cole, the ability to see past fangs and claws and venom and find the frightened creature underneath. And on Axio 7, in a habitat filled with plants and pools and warm rocks for basking, Rosie the alpha beast spent her days in the company of the strange little mammal who had saved her life, curling around him during thunderstorms when the lightning scared her and purring contentedly when he read to her from his datapad. She was not a monster anymore. She was family and somewhere in the galaxy. Creatures that had known only fear and loneliness began to learn a different lesson, that the small, fragile beings called humans were not prey or threat or enemy. but something far more dangerous and far more wonderful. They were friends waiting to happen. All you had to do was let them in. General Diane Kowalski sat in a bunker 300 meters beneath the surface of the Earth and reviewed the intelligence reports with cold satisfaction spreading across her face. 48 hours. That was all it had taken for humanity to detect the alien infiltrators. 48 hours from the first landing to complete identification of the threat. The Valkyrie had made several critical errors in their assessment of human capabilities. They had assumed that primitive technology meant primitive awareness. They had believed that a species still fighting among themselves would be too distracted to notice outside interference. They had underestimated the one trait that had kept humanity alive through ice ages and plagues and countless extinction events: paranoia. Humans had been watching their skies for threats since the first cave dweller looked up and wondered what the lights in the darkness might mean. They had built listening stations and orbital telescopes and early warning systems designed to detect anything unusual. And when 12 objects had descended through the atmosphere and landed in strategic locations around the globe, every major intelligence agency on the planet had noticed. "Show me the Montreal footage again," Kowalski ordered. The screen in front of her flickered to life, displaying security camera footage from a busy shopping district. A figure walked through the crowd, appearing perfectly human to any casual observer. But Kowalski's analysts had flagged dozens of tiny inconsistencies. The figure's micro-expressions were wrong, displaying emotions a fraction of a second too late, as if they were being calculated rather than felt. Its body temperature registered slightly lower than human normal on thermal imaging. And when one of Kowalski's field agents had accidentally bumped into the figure hard enough to cause a small cut, the blood that appeared was not red. It was violet. "We have confirmed locations on 4 remaining infiltration teams," her aide reported. "Squads 2, 5, 9, and 12 all under surveillance. We lost track of the others, but field reports suggest environmental casualties." Kowalski allowed herself a thin smile. Environmental casualties. The aliens had come to conquer Earth, and the planet itself had killed more than half of them before humanity even had to lift a finger. "What about the fleet in orbit?" she asked. 40 warships holding position beyond the moon. They appeared to be waiting for intelligence reports from their ground teams. "Our analysts believe they are planning a full military invasion once they have mapped our defenses." Kowalski stood and walked to a large display showing a map of the world. Red dots marked the known positions of alien infiltrators. Blue dots marked the positions of human response teams. For decades, humanity had prepared for this moment. Every major nation had contingency plans for extraterrestrial contact, and most of those plans assumed that first contact would be hostile. Secret facilities had been built. Weapons had been developed. Training programs had been established. The aliens thought they were infiltrating a primitive civilization. They had no idea they were walking into a trap that had been waiting for them since before they were born. "Begin Phase 2, Kowalski ordered. "I want all remaining infiltrators captured alive if possible. Dead if necessary. And someone get me a direct line to Beijing, Moscow, and Brussels. It's time to show these visitors what happens when you try to invade a death world." The capture operations began within the hour. Squad 12 was taken first, ambushed in their safe house by special forces teams from 3 different nations working in perfect coordination. The aliens had expected humanity to be divided, weakened by their constant internal conflicts. Instead, they found a species that could put aside centuries of hatred the moment an outside threat appeared. Squad 5 went down fighting, but human weapons proved far more effective than the Valkyrie had anticipated. Chemical propellants and controlled explosions might have been primitive, but they were also brutally efficient at putting holes in living tissue. The aliens had shields that could stop energy weapons, but they had never needed to develop protection against simple kinetic impacts. Squad 2 attempted to flee and made it almost 50 kilometers before a human aircraft dropped something on their position that turned a square mile of forest into a smoking crater. But it was Squad 9 that provided the real intelligence breakthrough. Commander Yethanol was captured alive in the Montreal Café, where he had been observing human behavior. He did not resist when the human agents surrounded him. He had spent enough time among these creatures to know that resistance would only make things worse. They took him to a facility that did not officially exist, located somewhere beneath a mountain range that humans called the Rockies. And there, they introduced him to human interrogation techniques. The Valkyrie had expected torture. They had protocols for resisting physical pain, mental conditioning that could withstand even the most brutal treatment. What they did not have was any defense against what the humans actually did. They talked to him. General Kowalski sat across from Yethanol in a featureless room and simply explained what humanity was. She told him about the ice ages that had nearly wiped out their species. She described the predators they had hunted to extinction. She detailed the plagues they had survived, and the wars they had fought, and the disasters they had overcome. She explained that humans were persistence predators, a type of hunter that did not rely on speed or strength. Instead, they followed their prey for hours or days or weeks, never stopping, never resting, until the target simply collapsed from exhaustion. Every other predator on Earth would eventually give up. Humans never did. Your species conquers through overwhelming force, Kowalski said, her voice calm and steady. You arrive with superior technology and superior numbers, and you crush your enemies before they can respond. But that strategy has a weakness. Yethanol found himself leaning forward despite his training. What weakness? It assumes your enemy will stop fighting when they realize they cannot win, Kowalski replied. Humans do not do that. We will fight until the last one of us is dead, and even then, we will have left traps for whoever comes to claim our territory. We do not surrender. We do not accept defeat. We simply keep fighting until we win or until there is nothing left of us. She slid a tablet across the table, showing images of human history. Wars that lasted decades. Resistance movements that continued for generations. Soldiers who charged into certain death rather than retreat. You have 40 warships in orbit, Kowalski continued. We have 8 billion people who would rather die than submit. Do the math. Yethanol stared at the images and felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. True, genuine, absolute fear. We will let you send one final message to your fleet, Kowalski told him. You can tell your commander whatever you think he needs to hear. But I want you to understand something first. She leaned forward, and her eyes were harder than any metal Yethanol had ever seen. We know you are here. We know what you want. And we are going to stop you. Not because we have superior technology. Not because we have greater numbers. But because this is our home, and we will burn it to ashes before we let anyone take it from us. She stood and walked toward the door. Send your message, and pray your commander is smart enough to leave. Yethanol sent his message, and it contained only 5 words. Do not invade this planet. Commander Zararathan received the message and ignored it completely. That decision would be the last mistake he ever made.